Hello and welcome to Religious Studies 100. The topic for today's class is Asian religions. We're going to be looking at Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. We're not going to go very much in detail. We're just going to have a simplified look at these religions. But you need to at least keep in mind the essentials for your test. Okay? So let's begin with Hinduism. Hinduism is a very ancient religion, maybe the oldest one, the oldest religious tradition in the world. It's practiced mainly in India, and in reality it's a conglomerate of religious practices and beliefs. The Hindus themselves did not have a word for Hinduism until the 19th century. It was a coinage by the British. What are the essentials of Hinduism? Well, there is a belief in an ultimate supreme deity whom the Hindus call Brahman. And there is a belief in many, many gods. The three most important ones being Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. Now, Brahma is not to be confused with Brahman. Brahman is the ultimate, unknowable ground of being, undescribable. Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma, and another literally hundreds of millions of gods in India are privileged spirits who, when their good karma, I will explain what karma means now, is spent, they will be reborn in the form of a human, and they have to strive again to achieve a later life as a god or even better, achieving what is called moksha. So let me explain these notions. Okay? There is a belief in Hinduism that we are reincarnated when we die. We are reborn in the form of another human, or perhaps sometimes in the form of an animal or even a plant, depending on your deeds, on your karma, on your deeds during this life. If you have a good karma, if you have done good deeds, you will be born as another human in a higher caste. Let me explain also what a caste is. And again, it will depend on your karma. Karma is the moral quality of your actions. You may have good karma or bad karma. In fact, karma is a word which has become so popular in the West that it basically requires no explanation. It almost requires no explanation. The goal of a Hindu is really not to be reborn, not to be reincarnated. What happens if you're not reincarnated? Well, then you join or rejoin really Brahman, this ultimate God of whom you are part. You just have to realize that your soul or Atman is part of Brahman. Atman means soul. Now, soul was always identified with our breath, our breathing capacity. And that's where you get the word atmosphere, the air, atmosphere, Atman, soul. So our soul is part of Brahman, but we in our blindness do not recognize ourselves as being part of this single ultimate God. And we look at ourselves as individuals, as separate individuals. So this illusion of separation is what's called Maya. So Maya is the illusion, the deceit in this physical world that makes us think that we are separate beings, when in reality we're just one. We are one with God, with Brahman. Now the gods, such as Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma, are not really one with Brahman yet. They haven't achieved final union with Brahman. They haven't achieved final liberation. This liberation is called moksha. They haven't achieved moksha. They had very good karma, so they were reborn as gods or goddesses. And when their karma is spent in a few billion years, they live long lives, then they will be reborn as humans again, and they'll have to strive for good karma like everyone else. But they haven't achieved moksha, final liberation. So this is part of the theology of Hinduism, okay? The supreme God, and then many gods and goddesses, and then humans and animals. There are other spirits out there, and you can be reborn as a human, or as an animal, or as a plant, or as a higher or lower spirit, or as a god, or hopefully in the end, everyone will achieve moksha, reunion with Brahman. Okay? Now in Hinduism, society is conceived as divided in castes. You could call that social classes, but it's more than social classes. The boundaries between castes are really impossible to overcome, okay? In this world, at least. So you may be born as part of the higher caste, the Brahmins, or priests, the Brahmins. Now, do not confuse Brahman with Brahmin. A Brahmin is a priest, okay? It's the highest, it's a member of the highest caste. But one thing is Brahman, the ultimate God, Brahma, some little god out there, and a Brahmin, a priest, three different things. Do not get confused. Then a lower caste is that of the Kshatriya, or the warriors. The third caste is that of the Vaishya, or the merchants. And then finally, the Shudra, or the servants. And those are subdivided into many other castes as well. So remember, the priests, the warriors, and the merchants, and then the servants, the Shudra. A subcaste of the Shudra being the untouchable. This is basically the schematic introduction that we need to Hinduism. The sacred scriptures of Hinduism are called the Vedas. It consists of 4 collections of books containing things as varied as the life of the gods and the goddesses and their deeds, chants to the gods and the goddesses, instructions for rituals, for sacrifices to the gods and the goddesses. Okay? Okay, now let me say a few words about Jainism. While Hinduism is a religion with a large fellowship, over 800 million people, in the case of Jainism, we're really talking about a very small fellowship, no more than 4 million or so. However, I want to discuss Jainism here, as you have it in there, Jainism, because it's a very peculiar religion. It's a truly different religion in many ways. For one thing, Jainism is an atheistic religion, which you would call an atheistic religion. There is no belief in an ultimate supreme deity, such as Brahman in Hinduism. In Jainism, there is the belief that the universe is eternal, and when your soul achieves final liberation, it doesn't rejoin Brahman or any god. It just goes to the highest spheres of the universe and stays there in a kind of indifferent situation, state. Okay? How do you achieve that liberation? That's also interesting in Jainism. Well, through extreme asceticism, self-deprivation. So you would practice fasting and abstention from anything, really from any action. The goal in Jainism is not to have any karma, neither good nor bad, no karma. Now, karma is synonymous with action. So all action produces some kind of a karma. So in Jainism, the ultimate idea is inaction, no action. So Mahavira, one of the prophets of Jainism, or Tirthankaras, as they're called, Mahavira, we are told, died of complete inaction, not doing anything. So Jains pursue this goal, a goal of non-violence too. It's part of the Jain doctrine, the Chinese doctrine. And this principle of non-violence is called ahimsa in Jainism. Ahimsa. Not hurting others. So many Jainists devote themselves to professions in which there is no need to hurt other beings. They will not be butchers or even work in the countryside or plow the land because that would hurt living beings. So they become, for the most part, businessmen, for example, and that kind of liberal professions. Jainist monks or nuns, when they walk, particularly the nuns, when they walk, they will wear a mask so as not to breathe by accident some little being floating in the air and kill it. They will wear a broom and sweep their way as they walk ahead of them so as not to step by accident on a little worm or insect and kill it. They will not light a fire because when you light a fire, you may kill little invisible beings in the air. So they're very careful with not hurting any living beings. Now, what I want you to remember from Jainism is at least three things. So there's no belief in a supreme deity. Extreme asceticism is the way to achieve final liberation. And one of their main principles is non-violence, ahimsa. Okay, now we move on to Buddhism. The founding figure in Buddhism is the Buddha. The word Buddha means the enlightened one, who lived in the 6th century BCE in India. The Buddha was a Hindu himself, and he followed the Hindu practices and religion, and we are told he was a prince. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. Legend says that when he was born, there were these omens that this man would be either a great ascetic, a great religious person, or a great prince who would rule over the world. Of course, his parents wanted him to be a great prince to rule over the world. And so they tried to prevent him from being a religious person, an ascetic, by avoiding the side of ugly things or things that might make him think about the problems of life and philosophize and turn more religious. And so by age 29, we are told he was born, he had a child, and he led a happy life, and he had never seen a dead corpse, he had never seen a dead body, or a very old person, or a sick person, or a beggar. He had never seen any of those. And then one day he decided to venture out of his palace, and he ran into these ugly sides of life: sickness, disease, old age, poverty. And he was so shocked. He was so shocked at seeing this that his reasoning was, how come that these things happen and we are doing nothing about it? Well, what can you do about it? From our viewpoint, we would think in social terms, trying to resolve the problem of poverty, or just advance in our knowledge in science to heal people, to cure people. But in his time and in his belief system, doing something about these problems really meant stopping the cycle of samsara. Let me add this word to our study of Hinduism. Samsara. Samsara is the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Because to him, not doing anything about these things simply meant staying in this chain of samsara, in this cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And of course, every time you are born, you're bound to become old and sick and die and suffer and all this. And therefore, that's what you want to stop. That's what he thought had to be stopped. And so he first tried the way of of Jainism, you could say, the way of extreme asceticism. And he practiced extreme asceticism for some time. And he saw that that was not the solution. And then he came to the conclusion that the true solution was one of a middle way, moderation and meditation, and compassion for living beings. He preached the Four Noble Truths. There is suffering in the world. He called suffering dukkha. The root of suffering is in desire. And there is a solution to suffering and desire. And that solution consisted of what he calls the Eight Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path to Liberation. Original Buddhism is also known as Theravada Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism. That's the oldest school of Buddhism. However, the Buddhist world soon split into two, Theravada and Mahayana. Mahayana being a form of Buddhism that itself split into many different forms, such as Zen, Nichiren, Pure Land Buddhism. In Mahayana Buddhism, what we have is the idea that you can achieve final liberation, you could call it salvation, quote, quote, through other means than just meditation and moderate asceticism, as in Theravada Buddhism. In other words, in Theravada Buddhism, the only way to get out of samsara really is pretty much to become a monk and spend your life in meditation and moderate self-deprivation, asceticism. Now, in Theravada Buddhism, in the original school of Buddhism, there is no belief in the soul. There is no denial of the existence of God of the other world. The Buddha refused to talk about those matters. But there is a denial of the existence of the soul and the self. Everything is an aggregate of things. There is not an entity that you can call yourself. So what happens in reincarnation? If in Hinduism we have your soul, your Atman, reincarnating in another body, in Buddhism there is no Atman. There is a doctrine of Anatma, Anatman or anatta. Both words are used depending if you are using Pali or Sanskrit. Anatman, let's call it Anatman. No soul, no Anatman, no Atman, Anatman. In the case of Mahayana Buddhism, other means are given you for achieving final liberation. The word for it in Theravada Buddhism is nirvana. So if you're a Mahayana Buddhist, you don't have to spend your life in a monastery practicing meditation and self-deprivation in order to achieve nirvana. Nirvana is really putting out of a flame. That's what it means. Is, in a sense, it's extinction. No more suffering, no more existence. You're out of samsara. In the different forms of Mahayana Buddhism, and we don't need to get into those here now, there are different goals too, not necessarily nirvana, but maybe enlightenment, as in Zen Buddhism, or even in some forms of Buddhism, such as Pure Land Buddhism. So let me mention these two, Zen and Pure Land. In those two forms of Buddhism practiced mainly in Japan today, nirvana is not the goal. In Zen Buddhism, the goal is to achieve what is called Buddha nature, some kind of enlightenment. In the case of Pure Land, it's more similar to Western religion. There is the belief in this heaven where these celestial beings called bodhisattvas live. A bodhisattva. I'll explain what a bodhisattva is. A bodhisattva is a person who was about to achieve final liberation, final nirvana, but decided not to in order to help you. And he stayed in this threshold between life and extinction and nirvana. And in there he created this beautiful heaven. And if you pray to these bodhisattvas, then you will go to heaven, to this heaven. That's Pure Land Buddhism. So we see how Theravada Buddhism, Buddhism went all the way from Theravada Buddhism, no belief in the soul, no talk about God or heaven or anything, with the ultimate goal of achieving nirvana, extinction, to Pure Land Buddhism, where the goal is to be saved in a heaven similar to that of, relatively similar to that of Western religions. Okay, let me move now on to Confucianism and Taoism. These are two Chinese religions. These religions originated in China. The founding figure of Taoism is Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism. We are told he lived in the 6th century. He probably lived in later than that, but legend places him, if he ever really existed, in the 6th century as a contemporary of the Buddha and also of Mahavira, and interestingly, as a contemporary too of some of the great Jewish prophets and some of the ancient Greek philosophers. We are told that Lao Tzu wanted to abandon civilization, and then on his way out of civilization, he was stopped by a guard somewhere and asked to put in writing, to put his beliefs, his thoughts in writing. And as a result of that, we got the Tao Te Ching, which is usually spelled as this. The Tao Te Ching. Tao meaning way. In in Taoism, what we have is a rejection of civilization. The idea being that it is civilization that corrupts us. It's a return to nature, what we should seek. This is in original Taoism. Now, Taoism has a tradition of over 2,000 years. It has evolved in many different ways. And today there is some kind of religious Taoism that places the emphasis on immortality and achieving immortality, physical immortality. But in original Taoism with Lao Tzu, we had this notion of abandoning civilization. Now in Confucianism, whose founding figure is Confucius, the idea is precisely the opposite. For Confucius, civilization is what makes us good. Confucius places a great emphasis on rituals, on performing certain rites properly, and he believes that by performing those rites and rituals well, we become good people. So there are a number of what he considers to be essential relationships in society, that of father, son, older brother, younger brother, husband, wife, ruler, subject, friend. So if you want to be a good filial son, a good son, we would say, you have to behave as a good son. Whether you understand why you're doing it or not, it doesn't matter. You behave the way you're told, and you become a good son just by behaving like a good son. You want to be a good wife, you behave like a good wife, and you'll become a good wife. And the same for a younger brother or for a citizen who wants to be a good citizen in relation to his country or the ruler. Now remember, for Lao Tzu in Taoism, that is precisely the problem. Too many rules, too many restrictions. That creates an excessive desire for things. In Confucianism, restrictions, civilization are the solution, the cure to the problems, to the illnesses that we are born with, the moral illnesses we are born with. To be precise, he doesn't really believe our nature is evil, but he believes we are born with so you would call a blank nature, something which can be shaped in any direction. Later Confucians and Taoist thinkers will argue that we are born either evil and we need civilization to make us good, or that we are born with the seeds of goodness, but those seeds of goodness need to be cultivated through civilization, or that we are born good, naturally good, but civilization corrupts us. So that debate went on and on for centuries in ancient China, way before it was even talked about in the West. But briefly, what I want you to remember here is that for Taoism, civilization is the problem. For Confucianism, civilization, rituals, obedience to the rules is the solution. Thank you.